Good morning, class 8. I welcome you all to your social science class. So students, as you all know, in our last class, we have finished the chapter, Why Do We Need a Parliament? We have done the revision, we have done the question answers as well. We have recapitulated all the important concepts from that particular chapter. So students, this brings us to the last chapter, the one last chapter which is remaining from your PT1 syllabus, that is ruling the countryside. It is the third chapter from your history textbook. So students, the learning objectives of this chapter are to understand how the company, after acquiring the Diwani of Bengal, started to colonize the country. That means, students, if you all remember, in the chapter from trade to territory, we have already come to know about how the East India Company was appointed as the Diwan of Bengal province. But in this particular chapter, in today's class, we shall be able to understand about its consequences. What happened after the company was made the Diwan of Bengal. And students, we will also be able to understand how the company utilized the revenue resources of India for their own personal benefit. That means we will be able to analyze how the company started exploiting the Indian resources, how it started using the resources or the revenues of India for their own personal benefit and not for developing the country. Also students, we will be able to understand how the company started redefining the rights of people through the process of permanent settlement and the problems associated with it. That means students, the company not only started using the revenue resources for their own benefit, they also started redefining the entire system by redefining the rights of the people by introducing a new system that was known as permanent settlement. We will be discussing about the meaning of permanent settlement, its features and the problems associated with this permanent settlement system. Okay. So students, the East India Company was appointed as the Diwan of Bengal province on 12th of August 1765. And when someone is appointed as the Diwan, it means that that particular person or that particular company is given the sole right to take care of all the financial matters. So the same thing happened with the East India Company as well. The company was given the sole responsibility of taking care of all the financial activities of all the financial affairs of Bengal. That means the company could now have access to all the resources of Bengal. So students, since the company could now have access to all the resources, it became very important for the company to organize the revenue resources in such a way that they could use the resources to meet their own personal expenses. That means the company now felt that it was very important for them to organize the entire revenue structure so that they can utilize the resources for their own benefit. Okay. But students, at the same time, since they were outsider, they were basically an alien power. They did not belong to India, they belonged to England, right? So they were also afraid of the local powers. So they decided not to eliminate this local power because it was very difficult to eliminate the local powers. So rather they decided that they will control the local powers. They thought that since we cannot eliminate the local powers, we should try to control the local powers. So this was the strategy adopted by the East India Company to proceed with their Diwani, to proceed with their position of the Diwani of Bengal. But students, when the company was made the Diwani of Bengal, its primary responsibility was to set up an organized system of revenue collection and revenue assessment, isn't it? The company was given this responsibility only because it was believed that the company will do justice to it. But students, the company, rather than focusing on the revenue system, rather than setting up an organized revenue system, the company was more interested in trading in India. The company was more focused on how to utilize the Indian resources to meet their expenses. We all know that the East India Company entered in India with the motive of trading. But even after they were made the Diwan, then also the company was mostly seeing it itself as a trader, not as a Diwan. So the company's primary agenda till now was to utilize the Indian resources to buy the goods from India so that the same goods could be sold in their own country at a much higher price. They were only focusing on how to make more and more money by looting India, by exploiting the Indian resources, the Indian revenues. Okay, so they used to buy the Indian fine quality of cotton and silk textile, the Indian spices, and the same spices and the same cotton and silk textile were later on sold in their own country at a much higher price. So students, within a period of 5 years, the prices of the goods which the company bought from India, it went up by 2 times. It became double. So this is how the company started using the Indian resources to make profit. Okay, and students, since India was looted by the company, the Bengal economy started facing a lot of crisis. Okay, its resources were exploited by the company. Bengal was left with no resources, so it faced several difficulties, several problems. For example, the agricultural sector was completely shattered. The peasants were unable to pay the loans. Why? Because the company used to buy the goods from the peasants at a very lesser amount of price. So the peasants were not able to repay the loans which they had taken, because they were given very less amount of money by the company, isn't it? So they were unable to repay the loans. Then the artistic activities, the artistic production in the country also declined, and as a result, the various artists who were engaged in various activities were forced to move out of their village. But students, the most serious or the greatest crisis that was faced by Bengal was the famine, which took place in 1770. Famine is a situation where there is extreme scarcity of food. So students, this Bengal famine took the life of 10 million people. 10 million people were killed in this Bengal famine, and not only that, 1/3 of the total population was wiped out. That means they had to leave their village. They had to escape this situation of famine because there was no food at all. So they had to leave their village and they had to migrate to some other places. So students, after the East India Company was made the Diwan of Bengal, Bengal suffered from a lot of crises. Agricultural slowdown, peasants unable to pay the loans, decline in the artistic production, and the greatest of them all was the Bengal famine, which took place in 1770. Okay. So students, the company now also started feeling that something should be done to revive the agricultural sector, because all these economic slowdown, all these economic breakdown was ultimately affecting their trade in India as well. So in order to boost up their trade, in order to revive the agricultural sector, they introduced one system that was known as the permanent settlement. It was introduced in the year 1973. So students, under this system of permanent settlement, zamindari rights were given to the rajas, to the kings, and to the talukdars. Talukdars means basically the aristocratic people, the people who were extremely rich, the people who possessed a lot of wealth, the elite class. Okay, so under this permanent settlement system, zamindari rights, right to land, was given to the rajas and to the talukdars, and they could have the right to collect rent from the small farmers, from the peasants, and from that rent collected, a fixed amount of tax was supposed to be given to the company, and the amount of tax which was supposed to be given to the company was permanently fixed. That means it was not supposed to change for a lifetime. It was fixed forever. Okay, so students, under the system of permanent settlement, what happened? Zamindari system was introduced. Zamindari rights were given to the rajas and to the talukdars, who were supposed to collect rent from the small farmers, from the small peasants, and from the rent received, a fixed amount of tax was supposed to be given to the East India Company. And students, why was this system of permanent settlement introduced? It was introduced for two reasons. First, in order to ensure a regular flow of revenue to the company. That means it was introduced so that the company can have a uniform flow of revenue for themselves, to ensure a regular flow of revenue for the country. And second, to encourage the zamindars to invest on the improvement of the land. So students, you might be getting confused regarding the second point. That means how to encourage the zamindars to invest more on the improvement of land. So students, let me tell you, under the zamindari system, the zamindars were required to collect rent from the small farmers, isn't it? And from that rent they were supposed to give a fixed amount of tax to the company. So that means if there is an increase in agricultural productivity, who will reap benefits out of it? The zamindars, isn't it? Because the company will get a fixed amount no matter how much the productivity is, but the ones who will be enjoying this improved productivity are the zamindars. So zamindars had the incentive to invest more and more on improving the quality of land so that they can enjoy more productivity, so that they can enjoy more income. So this system of permanent settlement was introduced. Why? Number one, to ensure a regular flow of revenue for the company, and second, to encourage the zamindars to invest more on the improvement of the land. Okay. But students, this system of permanent settlement faced a lot of difficulties. It had a lot of drawbacks. So number one, the zamindars were not at all interested to invest on the improvement of the land, because they knew that no matter they invest or not, they will anyway be getting rent for their land. If they rent it out to the cultivators or to the peasants, they will anyway be getting the rent. So they were not at all interested in improving the land. Okay. Then students, the second problem was that the amount of tax that was required to be paid to the company was very high, and so the zamindars found it very difficult to pay the revenue, because whatever rent they collected from the peasants, almost that entire amount was required to be given to the company. The zamindars were left with a very little or no amount of income. So the zamindars found it very difficult to pay the revenue to the company because it was very high. Then students, what happens when the zamindars were unable to pay the tax to the company? They were deprived from their zamindari rights, and sometimes their zamindari rights were also sold to other talukdars, or sometimes it was also sold to other rajas. So most of the zamindars, when they were unable to repay the tax, they had to lose their zamindari right, and these rights were then sold or auctioned to other rajas or to other talukdars. But then students, what happened in the first decade of the 19th century, the agricultural sector gradually started flourishing once again. The cultivation started increasing, it started expanding. But then also students, the company could not benefit from this because of the fixed revenue. Why? Because even though the agricultural sector started flourishing, the increase in the agricultural productivity was enjoyed by the zamindars, not by the company, because the company's tax was fixed, isn't it? So no matter how much the productivity increases, they will not be able to enjoy this. Who will enjoy this? This increase in income or this increase in productivity will be enjoyed by the zamindar. So no matter, even if the cultivation expanded also, the company could not enjoy this increase in cultivation because of the fixed revenue. Okay. So students, what happened? Even when the cultivation expanded, the zamindars still showed no interest on improving the land, as some of them had already lost their land when they were unable to pay the tax. So before only they had lost their zamindari rights, so they were not at all interested in improving the quality of land. And some who had the zamindari rights till now, they felt that even though they do not invest in the land, even though they do not invest in improving the quality of land, then also they will be able to make money by taking rent from the small farmers. So they had no incentive, or they were not at all interested in improving the land by investing it. Okay, so these were the problems which were faced by the zamindars and by the East India Company. But students, the most serious problems were faced by the cultivators, the small farmers. They were the ones who were exploited the most, because they had to pay a very large amount of rent to the zamindars, and sometimes what happened, their productivity was not that much. So what happened, they had to take a loan to pay the money to the zamindars, and when they were unable to repay the loan, they were evicted or they were removed from their land where they had been cultivating for such a long period of time. That means their work, their job was not secure. Their right over the land was at a risk. Okay, so the most serious problem was faced by the cultivators. Okay, because they were exploited. They were made to pay such a large amount of rent, that most of the time they were left with no amount of money for themselves. So most of the time they had no other option but to take a loan, and when they were unable to repay the loan, they were evicted or removed from their own land where they had been cultivating for such a long period of time. That means their right over the land was under greater risk. So students, these are the homework questions for today's class. Question number 1. What step was taken by the company to bring improvements in agriculture? So the company introduced the system of permanent settlement to bring improvement in the agricultural sector. Okay. And when was it introduced? It was introduced in the year 1793. And then you have to write the features of permanent settlement. So you have to basically write about the characteristics or the nature of permanent settlement. Then you have to write it was introduced with the motive or with the objective of reviving the agricultural sector in the year 1793. It was also introduced to encourage the zamindars to invest on the land to improve its quality. Okay, under this zamindari system, the small farmers were required to pay rent to the zamindars, and out of this rent, a fixed amount of tax was required to be paid by the zamindars to the company. Okay, and the amount of tax to be paid was fixed permanently. That is why it is known as permanent settlement. And then students, the next question, state the problems caused by the permanent settlement to number A, the company zamindars, and number B, to the cultivator. So I have given you the points and then you frame your answer accordingly. Okay. The last question, what problems were seen taking place in Bengal after the company acquired the Diwani rights? So Bengal started facing a lot of problems, agricultural slowdown, the peasants being unable to repay the loan, then decline in the artisanal productivity, migration of the artists from their village to some other places, and the Bengal famine, the greatest crisis that was faced by Bengal ever. Okay. So students, these are your homework questions and you need to submit it today itself in between 8 to 9 p.m. Alright, and students, tomorrow you have your chapter test. So kindly prepare yourselves well for the chapter test. Wish you all the luck. Thank you. Take care and stay safe.